Welcome to another segment of the My Broadband Cloud Conference 2020 on this virtual experience. A great pleasure to welcome Paul Ruinaard, who's the Regional Sales Director for the SADC region at Nutanix. We're going to talk about multi-cloud, it being the future. Paul, it's good to see you. Firstly, how are you doing? How's COVID-19 been treating you during the lockdown?
Yeah, I think it's become business as usual rather than business unusual, but it's been trying, but we're bearing up under the strain. So yeah, good to at least be getting some interaction and some conferences going again. So
good to see you. Good to see you. Now, Nutanix, what exactly does Nutanix do? Tell us a bit about the company.
So Nutanix basically came out of San Jose, Silicon Valley. What we did was we originally productized the architecture of the hyperscaler data centers, and we called it hybrid cloud infrastructure. Hyperconverged infrastructure. And hyperconverged is like an architecture to build massive data centers at scale. And we turned that into a product and basically brought it into the enterprise. And that's now become the kind of way you would build any cloud infrastructure, private or public cloud. And the next generation of it now is when we start talking about hybrid cloud infrastructure. So hyperconverged has become hybrid cloud. And Nutanix kind of invented that space and invented the products. The founders were ex-Google engineers who turned the Google file system into a product, the Nutanix distributed file system. And that's kind of what we did for the last 10 years, 11 years.
Okay, well, that's great. Thanks for explaining that. I mean, without the cloud that we have at the moment, I don't think that we'd have the same kind of business continuity if this had happened 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. But since the lockdown began and since this COVID-19 pandemic has really gripped the world economy, we've seen organizations like really literally sprinting to the cloud. You look at the capacity, you look at growth of data centers, etc. You really have seen incredible action. Is this the kind of picture that you're seeing, that people have adopted the cloud faster than ever before during this COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, actually, to your point, I think imagine if we'd had to do this with Edge on our mobile phones with text and SMS. It would have been a completely different scenario. So the technology certainly enabled the move to work from home in a very, very short space of time. So the cloud is an underlying enabler of the move when the pandemic hit was massive. And the companies that had in place strategies like DR strategies or business continuity strategies actually had a massive competitive advantage because they activated these strategies. So normally those were things that sat somewhere in the board minutes as a tick on the risk register. And all of a sudden, these things became, we moved masses of people off-site in a very short space of time through cloud-type technologies, desktop as a service, spinning up remote desktops, et cetera, and they were able to operate and, run their businesses, but in a time that other companies really struggled. So, yeah, it was a very interesting time to be in the industry, and IT operations folks who ran these have been working flat out since the pandemic started. Everybody else went home. They've been working flat out for months now.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually quite fascinating to see the evolution of the cloud, right? As more people move, organizations move more of their workloads into the cloud and start doing things differently. I guess it's sparking a lot of debates, and of course, money comes to mind, as it always does, and the costs and the billing of the services that you're using in the cloud, the migration, the software, all of those kind of debates that are happening in real time. And how vendors are actually charging for these services. Do you think that these are valid debates? Do you think that we're going to see more evolution on how services get charged as more organizations move more of their workloads into the cloud?
Yeah, there's a number of questions in there and a number of answers to them. So I think the first thing is people are getting used to consuming things on a subscription model. So the beauty of the cloud is that we see this as a place we can rent temporarily and move workloads in. The thing is, we still see the cloud as a place we take workloads from one place, in other words, on-prem, into another place, being a remote premise or cloud, was actually still physical compute and storage and things in there that we're buying and renting. So the other thing that is happening now is we're getting into a world where, so let's talk about the clouds. We've got AWS, we've got Azure, we've got GCP. People think of taking one workload, moving it off-prem into Azure, into AWS, into GCP, and having this remote control. What we're now seeing is that we're getting into this world where we're going to have multi-clouds, okay, and we're going to have workloads on-prem. So to answer your question, you're going to have some sort of a software control plane which now controls where you've got workloads, because certain of the workloads, like your company confidential data, will never move off-prem. You're not going to get IBM P-Series workloads into the cloud without refactoring the application. So you're going to have some on-prem, some in the cloud, and it's going to be where it makes sense. So what we're now having to do is get some sort of a way of adjudicating the billing. We know that for workloads that are fixed in a configuration and a performance envelope, it probably makes sense to run them on-prem because it's a less costly exercise. Whereas where we've got advanced analytics, or we need certain functionality that only exists in the cloud, makes sense to run in the cloud. So now we've got a place where some of the apps are running and some of the business logic is sitting on-prem. And then you get into a billing question. So a lot of people, where they have not really understood this continuum, have made the mistake of sort of, the analogy of if you drive down to Cape Town, or if you fly down to Cape Town, you hire a car and you hire a hotel. You don't buy one. So if you're going to temporarily be there, you're going to use it as a temporary billing, but it's going to be a lot more costly than if you purchased it, So this is the thing, which is the appropriate thing, which is appropriate for risk, for cost, and for the analytics that you need. So it's I think a question that we are seeing as people are maturing in their approach. They're starting to understand this question a lot more, and you're hearing the stories about the billing issues where workloads are not appropriately sized for the cloud. It's as we evolve and as we learn how to use this resource, we're gonna get better at this sort of thing and do more in this space to understand which is the appropriate place to run the workloads.
Sure. It sounds quite challenging, to be honest, Paul. And I guess that it's part of the evolution. And when you look at this evolution, and you look at the multi-cloud environments which you've been talking, and people moving their workforce up to their workloads up there. If you can cast your hats to look into the future, say 5 years from now. And we're going to see this growth to continue, no doubt, for the next 24 months. This incredible spurt to the cloud. Where do you see it going in terms of a multi-cloud environment? Are these kind of things going to be simplified, or is it going to remain challenging? And are we going to have the hurdles that you've just spoken about going forward?
Yeah, so strangely enough, we actually did a seminar on this 2 days ago with Herman Singh, one of the business school professors, and it was like he just thought cloud was the destination. I have some bad news for you. Cloud is just a step along the way to this multi-cloud journey. So let's unpack why you're doing this, because there's advanced analytics, there's certain functionality. We're looking at this world of remote process automation, AI, things like that, where we see advantage in some of the things that are potentially out there in these cloud apps. So now we're going to end up with a world where I'm not just going to take a workload and put it into AWS or put it into Azure and bring it back and have a one-to-one relationship with that cloud. I may have my Azure workload speaking to some of the functionality in GCP or AWS. That is a completely different architectural construct to the one-to-one thing that we still, we still in the world of we're going to save money by putting it into the cloud, and that's the end state. No, that's not the end state. Welcome to multi-cloud. Now, when you step it up to that level, all of a sudden you're starting to talk about architectural flows. And there's some nice stuff. David Linthicum is a guy I look at on InfoWorld a lot, and he kind of does a reference architecture for just one application. And it's like, this This is like, no, this isn't a mistake. We designed it this way. This is kind of what the flow looks like, on this whiteboard. So increasing complexity as we start getting into this world where we want to consume functionality from the cloud, and we've got peering across the clouds. And then you start getting into concepts which I had never heard about, like fog networking, where the networking becomes much more important. And you can go and Google it, because I had to. And so, just when you thought you'd reached the destination, everyone can settle back and we'll just go back to our ways of doing things. We just added another layer of complexity to the stuff that we're doing. So welcome to multi-cloud. And I think the key thing about multi-cloud then becomes the software control plane. How do I decide on this? And how to do all the things we were talking about earlier.
I guess, Paul, if you do things properly from the beginning, you will avoid a lot of complexity and hurdles in the future. What advice can you dispense on organizations that are, kind of starting really looking seriously at their cloud journey? What advice can you give to those organizations to avoid the issues that you've been talking about in the future?
Yeah, interesting question, because 2 years ago when we did some of the surveys, people were like, no, we're all in on the cloud. What we now have worked out is how much we don't know. So for example, when you say to a customer, you're all in on the cloud, have you looked at, for example, your Amazon landing zone? Because that's what you've got to do to set up the security. They go, well, we haven't even spoken about that yet. We go, well, then you don't really know what you're going to do, because and Amazon's landing zone is different to how you, for example, do Azure.
Yes.
So spend a lot of time, 70-80% is in the planning of how I'm going to do this, and 10-20% is in the execution. And logically moving, the low-hanging fruit, the easy to move, lift and shift type stuff, it's getting easier because you've now got functionality to, for example, do the network integration, simplify it, and then it makes the lift and shift a lot easier. So what we've got now from 2 years ago is vastly different, and it's advancing pretty quickly. So spend a lot more time planning and thinking about it, a lot less time moving workloads. And if you go back 4 or 5 years ago, you'll find people who tried to do this, who ended up with some of the workload in the cloud, some of it in on-prem, not being able to take out the costs they thought was very, very complex. So we're getting better at it, but spend a lot of time planning and spend less time executing, a lot of time testing, and work with easier, smaller DevOps type workloads, that test dev workloads that are going to give you a sense of what's actually going to happen when you move this into a cloud.
That's great advice. Paul Ruinaard, the Regional Sales Director for the SADC region at Nutanix. We thank you for joining us at the My Broadband Cloud Conference 2020. We wish you every success in the future. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Aki. Great to see you.
Thank you.